Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Whilst we wait for the projector to be set up, I'll just take one or two questions which were asked before Salatul Dhuhr. Number one is, one of the questions is, how can we tell that the partner which we are choosing has taqwa? So I think, inshallah, we will look into that, or we'll delve into that in the next section when it comes about selecting a partner. But I think one of the points I mentioned was that how do we know someone is deendar or not? So you can derive someone being pious or deendar by their ibadats, worship, whether they are praying, whether they are not praying. But then sometimes you can also notice their deendari, their taqwa, their piety in terms of the way they speak. There's many a time there may be somebody who may have a beard, who may be praying 5 times a day, but then when you speak to them, you notice or you realize that they are more inclined to dunya than anyone else. So it's like, for example, their ambitions will be about, oh, we want a bigger house, we want the latest designer clothes, we want the latest smartphones, we want the latest this, the latest that. Sometimes you can actually determine just by the way you speak to them and the way they communicate to you, that even though they may have beards, even though the sister may be wearing hijab and may seem to be practicing, but just by speaking to them, analyzing them, just by understanding, you can determine that actually their clothing and their external things in terms of wearing hijab, having a beard, that's just external. But in terms of what is in their heart, their ambitions, their kind of like thoughts, is more inclined towards having hubbud dunya, love for the world, and less kind of like attention towards their deendari, towards their taqwa, towards their piety. So with regards to that question, yes, there are ways to determine it, inshallah. Sometimes by just speaking to them, by observing their characteristics, we are able to determine many things, inshallah. Okay, now let's move on to the next part of the course, which is on page 7, and that is in relation to selecting a partner. Now, the main thing which we need to look at when it comes to choosing a spouse, so this is from both sides, whether it's a brother looking to marry a sister or even a sister looking to marry a brother. The first condition which we need to look at is regarding taqwa and piety. And it's mentioned in a hadith which can be found in Sahih al-Bukhari, that the Prophet of Allah ﷺ said that a woman is married for one of 4 reasons. A woman is married for one of 4 reasons: for her wealth, for her rank, for her beauty, or for her piety. And Prophet ﷺ said, choose the possessor of piety and achieve success. Now, let's just analyze these 4 points very quickly. When we look through history, Jews in particular, they would look at wealth. So whenever they would want to get someone married to their daughters, to their women folk, they would look at whether the man, whether the groom, whether he has enough money or not. Christians, on the other hand, they look at looks, they look at beauty. So the one who is the most handsome, the girl who is the most beautiful, they look at that. And in a way, that is that kind of like culture or mentality which is placed in a lot of the Muslim men and also Muslim sisters' hearts about, it's more about looks nowadays. So we just ignore totally everything else and we just look at looks. So this is in fact something which the Christians would do. And with regards to rank and status, then this is what the Arabs used to do. The ancient Arabs in Zamane Jahiliyyah, they used to look at ranks and status. There's also a hadith which can be found in Sunan Abu Dawud, a very detailed hadith. The contents of the hadith for some may seem indecent, but it's a hadith of Sunan Abu Dawud where Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that there are 4 types of marriages. One type of marriage is still allowed in Islam, but the remaining 3 types of marriages have now become invalid and cancelled. I'm not going to go over all of them, but it was a second one which I wanted to discuss, which is kind of linked with this particular point, that the Arabs, they look at more honor, they look at status, they look at rank. So it's mentioned in the hadith of Sunan Abu Dawud that the second type of marriage which was common in the era of ignorance was a man, he would have a wife. So when his wife would be free from menses, he would then send his wife to a man. He would send his wife to a man of a high rank, of a high status. Then he would commit zina with her, he would commit relations with her until she falls pregnant. Until she would fall pregnant. And when she falls pregnant, then that wife would then return back to her husband. And thereafterwards, he would then have relations with his wife who's fallen pregnant by another man, but that man was from a higher status and a higher rank. He would then have relations with her until she gives birth. And the whole purpose of why this man would do that is he wanted his wife to bear a child from a high rank and from a high status. So this is what they used to do in Jahiliyyah. Then when Islam came, Islam abrogated that particular form of marriage. But khair, I don't want to go into too detail about this particular topic. It's in Sunan Abu Dawud. Top of my head, it's the very last hadith of Kitabun Nikah, just before Babu Talaq. But you could have a look at it there. But khair, the point I'm trying to make here was about the Arabs. They look more at rank. They look at more status. They look at more in terms of the high ranks, even to the extent they would force their wives to have zina and to bear children from men who are from superior ranks. So this is what the Arabs would look at. So Islam came, and Islam is saying that, look, yes, you need to look at other things as well, like beauty and honor and wealth. But the main fundamental point to look at when it comes to choosing a spouse, choosing a partner, is regarding her piety and is regarding her taqwa. So this is what is mentioned in the hadith, which is in front of you, reference of Sahih al-Bukhari. And then there's some of the hadiths quoting Ibn Majah, saying that we shouldn't marry women just for their beauty, because it could make them the beauty could make them a source of their destruction. And likewise, we shouldn't marry women just because of their wealth, because it may cause them to be rebellious and mischievous. And we kind of see this nowadays as well, where people have just married for the sake of money or wealth or rank. Over time, those very same sisters and women, they become rebellious against their husbands. So whenever you marry, make sure your intentions should be good and that you're marrying someone who is pious, who is God-fearing, and it's also important that you marry someone with the intention to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, after mentioning these points, the next point which I want to mention, which is on page number 8, is regarding this topic about kuf or compatibility. So this topic regarding kuf and compatibility. Now, first and foremost, what I'm going to mention, I'm going to mention this from a fiqh perspective, and thereafterwards, inshallah, I'll try to look at it from a more modern day perspective as well. Now, first and foremost, kuf. Kuf means compatibility, and what Islam or what the Sharia says is that compatibility is looked at from the woman's perspective. So in other words, a woman or a sister who intends to get married, the question we need to ask is whether this man she is planning to marry, whether this person her family has found for her, is that person compatible for this sister or not? Is that person compatible for this particular woman or not? So that's what we need to look at. Now, the fuqaha, the jurists, have said that kuf and compatibility is in the following things, such as, number one, in terms of lineage. In terms of lineage. Now, in terms of lineage, it's mentioned in the books of fiqh that Arab women or Sayyida, they are considered to be compatible for Arab men or for Sayyid men. And besides Arabs, all other ethnic groups, Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, they are all considered to be kuf for each other, compatible for each other. Now, many of you may look at this ruling and think, well, Mufti Saab, we hear so many hadiths about equality. Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. There's no such thing as tribalism, racism in Islam. So why do we have such a rule where Arabs, when it comes to the compatibility side, they are considered to be separate, and then all other ethnic groups are then considered to be the same? Now, this particular question was actually posed by someone in a previous marriage course, which I did many, many years back. So I just remembered that particular question, so I just thought I'll just mention that objection again and also give the answers. Now, the best way is to maintain, the purpose behind it is to maintain a continuity in marriage. The purpose behind kuf is to maintain the continuity in marriage. And what we mean by continuity or compatibility is to make sure that the woman and the man, the boy and the girl, are on the same wavelength. Many marriages, I'm sure, you perhaps may even feel the same as well, or you may have noticed from afar, where there's issues regarding compatibility, then such marriages do not, okay, they may last fair enough, but they don't really end to be a very happy marriage. The consequences are that they're not really happy marriages, especially where, say for example, the woman, if she's from a different background, or a man is from a different background, from different cultures, sometimes from different countries. Sometimes we have the issue, I'm not sure it may be the case here in Australia, but sometimes the issue we have when men or even sisters who are from Pakistan, Bangladesh, Indian subcontinent, they get married and then they kind of like move to the UK. Now for some men, those in particular who know the language well, if it's Urdu well or they know Bengali very well, for them it doesn't really tend to be that much of a problem. They could easily communicate with their wives or with their spouses very well. But sometimes it happens where many of the youngsters, in particular in the UK, their mother's tongue they've totally forgotten. You know, even like Bengali or Urdu, it's just like very slang. It's like 50% mixed with English and a bit of Urdu and a bit of Bengali and everything mixed together. That's how they communicate with their elders. But generally speaking, especially now in the UK, it's more like third generation, fourth generation. Even the parents kind of know English as well properly. So everybody just communicates in English. So sometimes it happens that when they get married to someone in Pakistan, Bangladesh, the girl or the boy comes over, they find it difficult to communicate on that level. Obviously they communicate, but just like the basics. Oh, where's my food? Or where's this, where's that? But to kind of communicate on the level of like, you know, like your wife or your husband should be like your best friend. Shouldn't be just your wife, but it should be like your soulmate. Should be your best friend as well, in terms of all your secrets, all your issues, all your problems, perhaps at work, perhaps you may be studying, any problems at university, any kind of deadlines, whatever it may be, you kind of like speak to them and you kind of like get their help and their assistance and their mashwara and just get their kind of like consolement and their feedback. Classic example will be of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam when the incident happened in the cave, Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq, and then he returned home and he was shivering. So it was Sayyidah Khadija radiyallahu ta'ala anha who consoled Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and she kind of like told Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that no, there's nothing wrong with you. What you saw, it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will never humiliate you. You're a good person, you maintain ties, you speak the haqq, you look after the poor, and so on and so forth. So, you know, things like that, which sometimes, you know, we always get this issue, always get these types of questions posted in to our Darul Ifta about communicating. Very difficult. I'll talk about that later on, inshallah. But I think one thing to mention here is that kuf, compatibility, is very important. Now, during the early fuqaha time, during the early jurist time, yes, the Arabs and the non-Arabs, their cultures were very different. Very different. So therefore, the fuqaha, the jurists have said that Arab women, they are considered to be kuf for each other. But besides that, all other ethnic groups are considered to be more or less the same. So they could marry from within. But a point which I will mention later, but I think I'll probably mention it now as well, is we need to understand also that according to time and situation, the fatawas and the rulings also change as well. So what I mean by that is, yes, 1400 years ago or 1000 years ago, where the cultures between the two were very, very different, hence the fuqaha, the jurists, gave that particular ruling. Nowadays, I'll say that, especially with smartphones and internet, you could be living wherever you are. And do you know what? Do you know that Western ideology is still there? You know, if you go to Saudi, you know, there's McDonald's everywhere, there's Burger King everywhere, there's Pizza Hut everywhere. You know, the Arabs, you see them when you go for Umrah or Hajj. MashaAllah, they're even more advanced than ourselves. You know, if you go to Bahrain, where I went last year for a program, for a conference, so very similar there as well, that very, very modern. You know, all the latest gears, all the latest shops, the expensive shop. It's more Western. The only difference is that it's just the Arabic writing here and there. But besides that, that Western ideology is there. So the point I'm trying to make here is that nowadays when we look at a lot of cultures, it's just become like, you know, that nicheness of cultures have slowly gone. It's kind of like fading away. Everyone's more or less the same. You know, the way we speak, our mannerism, our standards, it's all being like made into one level now. And I'm sure 100 years ago, 50 years ago even, Wallah alam, every culture had their own characteristics, didn't they? But I think now when we look at it, it's like a lot of things are slowly beginning to fade away. Even like sometimes the food is more or less becoming more westernized food, with like chips and pizza. Everyone's like eating that now as well. So the point I'm trying to make is that this necessity of kuf in lineage is not perhaps necessary as much now as it was, say, many years ago. So that's like the first thing to mention about how to tackle this particular issue. So yes, the way to look at it is, if you look into the early books of fiqh, they have categorized Arabs and non-Arabs to be two different entities. And the Arabs, they could only marry each other, and non-Arabs only them. But remember, you need to understand that this rule was given many years ago, when they were considered to be two different entities and two different groups. Also at the same time, the fuqaha, when they gave this particular rule, they gave it with the intention that, look, that because each tribe or each of the groups were different, so to maintain the marriage or to keep the marriage ongoing for compatibility's sake, it was done with that particular intention, that okay, Arabs only marry Arabs and non-Arabs only marry non-Arabs. And if there was any, say for example, a Arab woman was to marry a non-Arab, initially that was considered to be incorrect. But as I said, now because of time and everything changing, kuf fil ansab isn't that necessary nowadays, even to the extent that Imam al-Bukhari rahimahullah, according to him, in his Sahih, he only has one condition when it comes to compatibility, and that is kuf din. That's it. He doesn't look at ansab, he doesn't look at hirfa, he doesn't look at mal, he doesn't look at hasab. He just looks at the fact that, okay, is this brother and sister, are they both believers? If the answer is yes, then that is more than enough compatibility when it comes to marriage, when it comes to nikah. So that's like one thing to mention about kuf compatibility in lineage. However, at the same time, if I just want to elaborate on this a bit more, looking at it from a modern day perspective, as I said before, that one of the main aspects of this particular rule regarding compatibility is for the continuity of marriage. So it's very important nowadays, in particular, when we choose a spouse, that the spouse we choose, they have to be on our wavelength. Yeah, you know, they have to be more or less on our wavelength. whether they share the same interest as us, whether they speak the same language as us, whether they understand the lingo and what is expected, in particular, say, living in Australia, living in the Western world. These types of points, I reckon, is very, very important for a longevity of a marriage. Which then takes me on to some other points which I want to just add on, such as age. Age. So that's also important as well, that when it comes to marriage, look at someone who's in the same age range as you. Doesn't have to be the exact same age, but in the same age range. Because just imagine if you are in your 40s and you're marrying someone who's just 18. That's like nearly half the age difference. So it is obvious that, especially perhaps nowadays with many girls who perhaps when they do get married when they're young, they've matured, yes, physically, but perhaps not mentally in terms of how to live in a marriage and how to look after husband and children and other responsibilities. So take that into consideration as well. Age is very, very important. All right, don't just marry anyone young or anyone old. Because if someone is too young, they may not have the same kind of like understanding as you. And if they're too old, then as you can imagine that your understanding and their understanding is also going to cause a rift and a problem later. Now this then takes me on to a point which I'll just mention in passing, even though it's not really part of the course. Obviously, some of you may be looking at this topic of age and may think to yourself, well, Mufti Saab, didn't Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam marry Sayyidah Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala anha at the age of 6? And then the marriage was then consummated at the age of 9. So that should then mean that you can marry women or girls where there's a big age difference between the two. Because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he married Sayyidah Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala anha, he was 53 years old, and Sayyidah Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala anha was only 6 years old. Now, first and foremost, we need to understand that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and we ourselves are, we're totally different. Sometimes we can't do qiyas, we can't compare exactly to our situation to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But going back to that point about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam marrying Sayyidah Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala anha at the age of 6. One thing to mention here, just mainly as clarification, Sahabiya whose name was Khawla bint Hakim radiyallahu ta'ala anha. It's mentioned in the books of Seerah that when Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's wife Hazrat Khadija radiyallahu ta'ala anha passed away, Khawla bint Hakim radiyallahu ta'ala anha suggested two women I should say, two proposals for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. She said to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that if you want to get married to someone who has been previously married, then I suggest for you Sauda bint Zam'a radiyallahu ta'ala anha. And if you want to get married to someone who is a virgin, then I suggest for you Sayyidah Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala anha. So Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to Hazrat Khawla that, okay, fine, go and propose to both of them. So when Sayyidah Khawla radiyallahu ta'ala anha came to Abu Bakr radiyallahu ta'ala anh, the first objection Abu Bakr radiyallahu ta'ala anhu had was that, well, how can I give my daughter to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is my brother. How can he marry his niece? So then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam clarified through Sayyida Khawla radiyallahu ta'ala anha that look, yes, I am your brother, but I am your brother in deen, not in nasab, not in lineage. So I can marry your daughter if you allow. And the second issue was that Hazrat Abu Bakr radiyallahu ta'ala anhu at that time promised Sayyida Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala anha that he was going to give his daughter to Mut'im bin Adi. He was going to give his daughter, Sayyida Aisha, to Mut'im bin Adi. So what happened was that Abu Bakr radiyallahu ta'ala anhu's stance was that whenever he made a promise, he never rejected, he never broke a promise. So he went, he spoke to Mut'im bin Adi and his family. When they decided that, or they don't want to go ahead with the marriage, then only then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was then allowed to marry Sayyida Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala. Only then Abu Bakr radiyallahu ta'ala anhu consented to the marriage. And even after they got married, for 3 years, Sayyida Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala was in Abu Bakr radiyallahu ta'ala anhu's care. He was looking after her. And then when she was ready at the age of 9, and even it's mentioned in the books of hadith that it wasn't like Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam suggested. It was when Abu Bakr radiyallahu ta'ala anhu said to Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that when are you going to take Sayyida Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala anha, only then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam consummated the marriage and took Sayyida Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala anha to his house. But the point which I want to make from here is, I know the first objection a lot of you will have is, well, look, Mufti Sahib, she's 6 years old. And, at the age of 9, okay, the marriage was consummated. So the point is that, as I'm sure all of you know, that to carry out such marriages, especially in the modern world, is a criminal offense. So first and foremost, some of you may be thinking that how is that even possible? So you need to understand that in Islam, yes, we abide by the law of the country. So whatever the age of marriage is in this country, whether it's 16, 18, only Allah knows best, inshallah, we have to, as Muslims, abide by the law. But just trying to explain it from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's perspective, you need to understand that in Islam, the age of marriage is from maturity. Like what I mean by that is, you could get married, like the nikah can be done before, but in terms of consummating the marriage is from the moment when they mature. That's why it's mentioned in a hadith of Tirmidhi, narrated by Sayyida Aisha radiyallahu ta'ala anha, that she said, إِذَا بَلَغَتِ الْجَارِيَةُ تِسْعَ سِنِينَ. When a girl reaches the age of 9, فَهِيَ إِمْرَأَةٌ. فَهِيَ إِمْرَأَةٌ. She is a woman now. So what we understand is that the age of marriage, there isn't a particular age. It all depends according to the time, according to the country, according to halat, as I just mentioned, and according to situations. If you look in the US, well, not now, but even now, wallahu alam, but there's a group called the Mormons. So they allow marrying girls at the age of 13, age of 12 or 13. I'm not sure what they allow it now, but that's in their beliefs. And even if you look at some other countries, such as in Africa, like in Angola, girls are married at the age of 12. In Burkina Faso, age of 13. Age of 13. In Philippines, age of 12. Argentina, in the age of 13. Age of 13. And even in the UK as well, just only in the last century where the rules have changed. But before that, age of 14 was considered to be the age of marriage. So what we can understand here is that age, it all depends on actually whether the girls are ready for marriage or not. And when we compare all these ages, whether it's 12, whether it's 13, whether it's 14, that is roughly the age when a girl matures. So what we can understand is actually, like, it's not about the age, it's about when they are ready, i.e. when they mature. And obviously, girls, women, they'll mature in different, according to time, according to situation, at different ages. So, and on top of that, as I mentioned, that even Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha, she was kind of like engaged at that time to Mut'im bin Adi as well. And there's many, many examples of that amongst the Sahabas, Sahabiyat, of like proposing at a young age. So what we can understand here is that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, firstly, he didn't like force himself, na'udhu billah, to marry Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha. I think there's a king in, what's that place called? I think they changed the name of the country, Swaziland or something. They have a particular rule that every year the king chooses all the virgin girls. They all gather and he chooses a virgin girl and he kind of marries her. So it wasn't, na'udhu billah, like that. The Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam chose Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha. Even through the accounts, you can see it was Khawla bint Hakim radiallahu anha who suggested Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then on top of that, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam didn't even take Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha in her house straight away. It was until the age of 9. And even then, that was based on the suggestion of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu that, look, we now settled in Medina Munawwara. When are you going to take Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha? And then also on top of that, regarding the actual age itself, as you can see that varies. That is based on the situation when a particular girl matures and when she doesn't. So it's all based on time. So because of that reason, we can't say that, oh, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam marrying at the age of 6 and 9, he did something which was criminal. No, yes, it may be criminal now, but during Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time, 1400 years ago, it was considered to be acceptable. It was considered to be right, and it was considered to be correct. There's so many things, I'm sure, even living in this country, staying in this country, ask yourself, look how many rules and laws have changed 20, 30, 40 years ago. 20, 30 years ago, so many things you could have done which was considered to be lawful, but now you're considered to be breaking the law. 20, 30 years ago, perhaps there wasn't that much strictness on speed or driving and then making sure that you're within a speed limit. 50, 60 years ago, that wasn't the case. But now if you drive over a certain speed limit, you get pulled over, and that is a criminal offense. So what I'm trying to explain is that now we can't say all those people who drove fast 50, 60 years ago, they're bad because they were breaking the law. No, the breaking the law starts from now, but what they did before was considered to be lawful, was considered to be legitimate. So likewise, to use kind of like modern day rules and to now then say, oh, all the Sahabiyat, all the Sahabis were incorrect, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was incorrect in what he did, then that is something which is not correct and not allowed to do. So these are, alhamdulillah, a few things to mention about the age. So it's important that we look into age as well. I already mentioned about compatibility, making sure that the sister who we are marrying or vice versa, they are also the same kind of like share the same goals and perspective in life. Which then takes me on to another point, which is, I think, kind of important to mention, and that is regarding, because I know there's a lot of ulamas and a lot of students of ilm around, and that is a alim marrying a alima, a male scholar marrying a female scholar, or a female scholar. Is it necessary that she marries a male scholar? Now, it's not necessary that she has to marry a male scholar, but it is something which you can say that it is encouraged based on the kuf, based on the compatibility, based on compatibility. The same way, if a daughter was a doctor, you'll find many parents will always look for a doctor to marry their daughter. If their daughter was a lawyer, they will always look for a lawyer, a male lawyer, to marry their daughter. If she was a barrister, then they will look for a barrister or someone who is, as I say, professional to kind of marry their daughter and so on. Now, likewise, based on kuf and compatibility, yes, it is encouraged that a alima marries a alim. What kind of compatibility there can be? One thing about, as we were just having lunch and so on, was just listening to some of the stories of madrasa life and these things. And this is something which is kind of unique whenever we sit down with our friends and colleagues from madrasa. We always have like certain stories we like to share, that, or when we were in year 1, we used to do this, or when we were in year 2, we used to do that. When we were in year 3, we got in trouble, and year 4, this happened, and year 5, that happened, and so on. So alhamdulillah, we always have stories to share and to tell. And likewise, marrying, say, a sister marrying a alim, I'm sure they will also have like stories to tell. They'll understand each other's background. They'll understand, over the dinner table, there'll be something necessary, because to tell the truth, I have encountered some alims who are, for some reason, they're very strict on this issue, and they go on to the extent that, no, if a alima marries a ghair alim, a non-alim, then that nikah is not done. They go on to that kind of level. So it's not as strict. Yes, it's good and it's encouraged that she marries a alim, but at the same time, even if she does marry a non-alim, or even a alim was to marry a non-alima, it doesn't mean that nikah, the girl he got married to, doesn't mean that that nikah is invalid, or vice versa. It doesn't mean that. Yes, it's good, it's encouraged, but at the same time, if, say, for example, if you do get married to someone who is not an alim or not an alima, it's not a major issue, because the key thing you need to look at, and this goes back to that point which I want to mention, the key thing you need to look at, everyone, is piety, is taqwa. You need to look at whether she's swaliha, and likewise, from a woman's perspective, whether the man you are planning to marry, whether he is swalih. You need to look at that. That is like the key thing, because I'm sure some of you will turn around and say, oh, well, Mufti Sahib, I know so many alimas who are not pious and so on. And I'm sure a lot of sisters will say, well, I know a lot of alims who are not pious. So what I'm trying to explain is, just because they got the title doesn't necessarily mean that they are pious. Does that make sense? I made that point yesterday as well. Just because somebody's got a beard doesn't mean he's pious, by the way. Yeah, non-Muslims have beards as well. A lot of people have beards outside. They're non-Muslims. Does that make sense? Even Christian nuns wear the hijab. But does that make them alimat? No. Does that make them swalihat? Points I made earlier that, okay, how do we know whether someone is pious or not? How do you know someone is pious or not? So I gave that example just for those brothers and sisters who perhaps weren't there at the beginning. I mentioned that, look, when you kind of like, it's very easy nowadays to suss people out. It's very, very easy. Either one way is by looking at their family, speaking to family members, finding out what their objectives are. Also, I gave that example of the hadith before from Tirmidhi, asking neighbors. Nowadays, also, you could check on their Facebook as well, seeing what kind of person they are. Sometimes Facebook kind of reveals everything, doesn't it? Social media does sometimes reveal everything. It's like, say, the example of, well, I think the scholars will know of muannas simai words, isn't it? Muannas simai, those words which are feminine, but you're not sure whether it's feminine or not. So what you do is that you put it on the ism tasghir, and then you find the tanis at the end, and it means, oh, it's a feminine word. So sometimes, Facebook kind of reveals the reality. So everybody may have the beard and so on, or sisters may be wearing hijab. Then if you check on their Facebook account, there's no hijab, there's nothing there. So then you know the reality. So sometimes, but I think the best way to suss people out is through communicating with them. Okay, and it goes back to that point which I just mentioned a little short while ago. Don't just always fall for words, and always don't fall for looks in terms of like beard, hijab, niqab, and also at the same time words. People nowadays are very, very clever with words. People could like easily win you over through words, but just look at their practice, look at their habit. Those students who study under me, I've said this many times in class, that over the past few years, I've been running the madrasa or the institution. A lot of people will come on the first day and say, oh, Mufti Sahib, I want to be an alim, and I want to do this, I want to do that, and so on. And what I do, I don't even listen to these things anymore. I'll just say, okay, you know what? Prove it to me you want to be an alim. Show me you want to be an alim. How early do you come for class? Do you learn your lesson? Do you do muraja? Do you do takrar? Let's see that you want to be alim. Don't come and give me nice words that you want to be an alim. Well, you know what? I want to be an astronaut. Does that mean I want to be an astronaut? No, it's just you need to like back it up through actions. So likewise, when it comes to marriage in particular, a lot of people will kind of like say nice words that, oh yeah, I want my daughter to marry a scholar. I want my daughter to marry so-and-so pious person. Or likewise, I want my son to marry your daughter. She's an alima, she's pious, she's this, she's that. Don't just listen to words, look at the action. Are they really pious, yes or no? And the way to suss them out is very easy through talking to them, speaking to them, which you look at that on the next page. But even by just speaking to families, you could work this out. Just by speaking to families. I said to one brother who got recently married, like he was a bit nervous. He was going to meet obviously the sister. He was going to meet her the first time. You have the Nazr Makhtuba. So he was going to have a meeting with her. So he's a bit nervous and so on. He's asking me a lot of questions about, Mufti Sahib, how do I know whether she's pious or not? And so on. I said, you know what, like, you're not going to really get that from her, because obviously that meeting you have with the sister you want to marry, it tends to be very, very awkward. Let's put it like that. You're probably there. There may be other people there as well. You're not going to really ask too many questions. You're a bit shy. She's definitely going to be shy. And you're not going to really suss anything out. Where you're going to suss it out is by speaking to members of a family. Members of a family. So I was saying that this brother, he went to meet the sister. Obviously, like I said, he just met her for a couple of minutes. But I told him that, you know what, suss the family out. See what kind of family they are. Now, he's told me before he went to meet that, Mufti Sahib, the family, they're all alims, they're all religious and so on. I go, yeah, that's fine, but you'll go and suss them out. So now he went, he sat down with the alims, with all the brothers and so on, who are mashallah, all alims and so on. And subhanallah, he said that during the hour he was there, they all gave him salam, but there wasn't any kind of formal greetings. So he was there for an hour, obviously him and his family. They didn't do any kind of khidmat, any kind of ikram. There wasn't any kind of like formal greetings. And subhanAllah, during the hour which he was there, they spoke more about dunya than deen. They spoke more about dunya than deen. And then I told him, look, you make your decision what you want to do, but that in a way is a good example of what kind of family you are dealing with. SubhanAllah, being there for an hour and no one does your ikram, bearing in mind you're going to get married to their daughter, to their sister, that in itself shows a lot about the family. Why aren't they doing your ikram? There must be a reason, like why aren't they doing your ikram? Why aren't they, looking after you? Why aren't they doing their khidmah? These things, you need to ask questions about it. You can't just brush these things under the carpet and say, they were a bit lazy. Well, no, that's not an excuse. So little things like that, why aren't they looking after you? You've come as a guest. SubhanAllah, I've just been to one of the brothers' house for lunch. SubhanAllah, the ikram, we see it's different. You feel at home. This is how the Ansar were when the Muhajireens came. The ikram was next level. So if they're not even looking after you, not fulfilling the basic rights of man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawmil akhir falyukrim doifahu, they're not even fulfilling that. SubhanAllah, how on earth are they going to fulfill the rights of sihr? How are they going to fulfill the rights of being a brother-in-law, a son-in-law, when they can't fulfill the basic elementary right of hosting the guest? So I said, look, you make the decision what you want to do. But as I was saying, going back to that point, sussing people out. Yeah, you could just suss people out. What I mean by suss, by the way, is just like you could gauge people what they are. Just because they're alim doesn't mean they're going to be really taqwa and really pious. Look at the actions. If they're not doing your ikram correctly, that shows something about a family. There's some deficiency in their family. There's some kibr in their family. Why aren't they doing the ikram? Ikram, I look at that as well a lot. Is about respecting guests and so on. Whenever we have guests coming to our madrasa, make sure all our students are doing the khidmat of the guests. Very, very important. So, things like that, it builds humbleness, humility, these things, very, very important. So, anyway, so these are like certain points to, inshallah, mention. Shall we pause for so many questions? Anybody has any question they would like to ask, or we can, before we move on to the next topic? Or is there some left? Okay. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, them two have been answered, yeah. Okay, I'll take some questions for 1 or 2 minutes, then we'll continue. We've still got quite a lot to cover as well. Okay, how do I get introduced to someone in a halal way? Okay, single people, divorce, widows, over the phone, halal way. Okay. Very good question. How to, because obviously we've talked about finding the right partner. So now that leads to a question in terms of how do we find the correct person? What avenues we should look into and so on. So this is actually becoming a problem, a challenge now for many, many brothers and sisters. I spoke before that many brothers and sisters, they would like to get married in their mid-20s, preferably, but because of family restrictions, they can't. Sometimes family are not really interested in getting their sons or daughters married. So sometimes the onus is on the son or the daughter to look for a groom. So, that is the reality in some families. So how do they go about? So my recommendation would be, if, say, for example, if the senior ulamas of the masjid, if they could take responsibility of, you could say, matchmaking, if you want to call it, or arranging marriages and so on. If they have a kind of like a database, because I'm sure with imams, scholars, we always get asked this question. Mufti Saab, do you know a sister? Mufti Saab, do you know a groom? And so on.
Just contribute to that one.
Okay.
Practical basis involved.
Okay. Even?
So Mufti Saab was mentioning about databases. So unfortunately, I don't have a database. So all the single guys are coming out. And firstly, we're not doing speed dating today. Some brother yesterday asked me to tomorrow you all night why. I said no, it's just about learning about marriage. So I'm not coming to that. So Mufti Ziyad, BGCC in England. Inshallah, he has some sort of database of what I'm doing. So he can go and see it, inshallah. So, but not in this, unfortunately, in this masjid, it's a challenge. All the due diligence and things that have been done. There's no elder, although my father, he's the elder Arvin here. But Mufti Ziyad in England, he's got some list, inshallah. So, inshallah, you can go visit him, inshallah. And I'll give you a recommendation for the brothers that I know. If I don't know you, if I haven't seen you in the masjid, don't come for a recommendation. Even my friends who come for recommendations, they don't get a recommendation. Brother, if you remember Mudassir Ali, he used to be here. He married Mufti Munib's daughter, Alima, mashallah. He came for a recommendation, and Mufti Munib called me. I said, yeah, he's a good guy. I've seen him in the mosque. That's it. That's all you're going to get. So I'm not going to say it. But anyway, I thought I'd just let you know, BGCC, they do have some arrangements there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so inshallah, something like that'll be better. I know there's a lot of, obviously going back onto like speed dating or all these things like Tinder, whatever it's called. I think there's a Muslim equivalent of that. I'm not sure whether it's popular here, but there's a Muslim equivalent of that where it's just basically swipe through if you like someone and you click or something like that. Wallah, somebody was telling me all that. So again, looking at it from a fiqh perspective, it's something which will be la yajuz, very simply more on the basis of saddan lil bab. Saddan lil bab basically means that not to because we could imagine that if we allowed that, it'll be like people will be in contact with the opposite gender. There'll be messaging, there'll be texting, whatever, dating, whatever you want to call it, that will all start. So I know sometimes some brothers do say, oh, well, Mufti Sahib, we're not in contact with them, we just contact their wali or something like that. I think just to be on the safe side, saddan lil bab, it's best to, saddan lil bab means just to like stop the doors of fitna from spreading or from opening. It's best that we don't basically get into that. But I said there are some of the halal alternatives. Obviously, the best way will be through parents. If not, ask your local imams, ask Mufti Sahib, as Sheikh Khalid Sahib just mentioned. Or if not, there are some other places. I think there's another place called Sakina, which is also like online, which is registered or under the supervision of Mufti Ibn Adam from Leicester, who kind of deals with this as well. So there are kind of like a number of places and so on, which are lawful, legitimate, and these things. You could look into that. Personally, I myself, I don't really get into that because I think, yes, I know there's a lot of reward in kind of like uniting two people together, but I think sometimes it's one of the reasons why perhaps a lot of the imams don't get involved is if there was a marriage breakup, the imams always get blamed. It's happened to a lot of my colleagues where they have actually arranged marriages for people. When the marriages fail, they're the ones who get in trouble. Mona Sahib, it was your fault, and you said this and you said that. And it's just something like I personally myself don't want to get involved, even though a lot of people do ask me. I just said, I don't know anyone. It's just something which I personally don't want to get involved because of the problems which can be created in the future if, say, for example, marriages and these things don't work out. Now, if we just move on to the next, I'll take some questions here and there, inshallah, over the course of the next few hours. Okay, let's move on to page 9, meeting a prospective suitor. So again, the fiqh is mentioned there, the hadiths are mentioned there. This is kind of very, very important. It's what is known in the books of fiqh or in the books of hadith as nazr makhtuba, i.e. looking at the one who you have proposed to. Now, surprisingly, there are some cultures, even now as well, which don't allow the boy to see the girl. There are certain cultures, obviously totally non-Islamic cultures, which don't allow. They say, no, you can't look at the girl. So the first time they see the girl is on their wedding day, on their wedding night. That's the first time they see the girl. Photos, these things, they don't even allow any of that before. So the point which I want to make is that a lot of people think that is Islamic, not to look at the girl before marriage. But the reality is that actually looking at her is something which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has encouraged. And there are many hadiths, one or two which have been mentioned there, that it creates love between the two. And also the hadith of Sayyidina Jabir radiyallahu ta'ala an. But one should remember that when you are meeting this girl for marriage, she is still a stranger, she is still a ghair mahram. So the rules and regulations in relation to a ghair mahram is applicable. That is, in other words, you can't meet her in private. Okay, fair enough, just say you want to meet her in a room, there can't be any seclusion. And the way to stop the seclusion is the very, very least having the door open. Okay, fair enough, there's no other members there of your family or her family in that room, so it's just you and her, that's fine. But at least have the door open so that there isn't seclusion, because as soon as the door is locked and a third person can't enter the room easily, then that becomes khalwa. So khalwa is impermissible with a ghair mahram, with a strange woman. So just make sure that you are meeting her, you speak to her. Obviously things such as going out for a date or something like that, that's impermissible in Islam. Taking her out for a meal, these things, that's impermissible. Okay, contact before, whether through messages and these things, that's also impermissible as well. So the way to go ahead, the way to do it in a halal way is by meeting her. Now obviously when you're meeting her, as I said a little while ago, that it's going to be a bit nervous and awkward. So it's very difficult to ask like certain questions and these things. But at the same time, it's also very, very important that certain things have to be discussed. There's some examples I would like to give, such as marital status. You have to disclose that. For example, if you're marrying someone and that girl who you're marrying, her or the family are under the impression that you haven't been previously married. You haven't been, but you have. So you have to disclose that. There's been a lot of cases like that in the UK, where obviously they've been previously married, and the second marriage for the man, but the girl's family think, oh no, he's just like first marriage. So they haven't disclosed that. So things like that you have to disclose. If you have children from a previous marriage, you have to disclose that. That's also been a case as well. So things like that you have to disclose. You can't, one of those things, you can't just brush it under the carpet. Before. Now, again, I think it's similar to one of the answers I gave before. Look, you don't have to disclose every single sin of yours. All right, just use your wisdom, because in that case, look, no one's perfect. I'm sure, as I said, everyone's got skeletons somewhere locked in their cupboard. You know, we've all done mistakes in the past. So if you're going to disclose every single sin of ours, then no one probably won't get, no one in the earth will get married, because everyone's going to be evil and bad. So just sometimes use your wisdom. Okay, look, fair enough, if you've had a girlfriend before, you done tawbah, okay, so you made a mistake, you done tawbah from it, look, no one knows about it, then there's no need for you to disclose that to your prospective, the girl who you want to marry now. There's no need for you to disclose that, and vice versa. Obviously, things such as marriage and children you've had before, that's different. But something like here, where you made a silly sin you committed before, when you were young, naive, you don't tawbah from it, and so on, then things like that you don't actually have to disclose. Look, some sins you may need to disclose, like say for example, I don't know, if you think that it's going to affect marriages. So I think things such as definitely like, I don't know, if you've been convicted of a crime before, I don't know, to say you were in jail for many years for manslaughter, for murder even, or for something else. Now you don't tawbah, fair enough, but then you're getting married to somebody. I think something like that, a criminal conviction like that, I think you have to disclose. Because because if the girl's family find out like you've been locked up for many, many years for murder, that's, it's going to definitely change their perception whether they want to go ahead with the marriage or not. So things such as being in prison for many, many years, or other crimes you've done, or gambling, I don't imagine you had a gambling habit before, you still may have, alcohol, like you were alcoholic before, you may still be, these things like that. So I think these types of sins, yes, you probably have to disclose so that person understands, okay, do you know what they're kind of dealing with. Because again, we've had issues as well. Sisters would get married and they find out the guys they married, they're alcoholics. They beat their wives up and so on, they become very abusive and these things. So these things does affect the marriage in the long run. So things like that, yes, you have to disclose. Also, I'll probably mention it now. Does the girl have to make clear, okay, let me repeat that again. Does living arrangements need to make clear? Living arrangements. In other words, in the UK, it's very common, a very common question is she going to live with the parents or are they going to live in their own separate house? So it's like one of the questions sometimes the girls will ask, or sometimes the boy may clarify and say, okay, I'm going to get married to you, but these are the conditions that you'll have to live with my parents or we will live separately. So what's the rule with regards to that? Now, again, it just depends on situations. So I don't want to give an answer here. I don't want to give a general fatwa. Because I think certain things also depends on culture, time, situation. And again, well, this is my second visit to Australia, but my first visit to Melbourne. So I told you I'm not sure how the halat and how everything works here. I'm just like someone new to this part of the world. So I don't have any understanding of how cultures and how everything works. But just looking at it from a UK perspective, from my experience or just from experience with, say in particular ulamas who have graduated and then they get married more or less straight away after they graduate, or even for alimats as well. I think it is good in particular, especially in the beginning years, if say for example, if the condition was made or if it's made clear that look, we're going to be staying with the parents, with the in-laws, as long as there's parda and everything there, then I personally will encourage that, especially for graduates from madrasas and also for sisters, alimats in particular, or even just sisters who are not alimats for that matter. And the reason why I suggest that is for a couple of reasons. Number one is going back to being an alim or a graduate. When somebody graduates, especially from madrasa, financially they're not really strong or stable. They may be teaching in a madrasa, they may be teaching in the local masjid or maktabs. Again, I'm not sure about the wages which the imams or the muallimins or mudarrisin get here in Australia. It may be very high, only Allah knows best. But in the UK, it's not really that strong, shall I say. Just minimum wage, and some places even below minimum wage. But anyway, that's an issue for another day. So now financially, they're not really that strong. So for them to kind of like rent a house, even renting a house is very, very expensive in the UK. Because you have to pay X amount of deposit first, and sets you back a lot of money if you don't have it, and you don't want to get into debt straight away. So sometimes it becomes financially very difficult. So look, if you're living with your parents for a year or two, so one benefit is from the husband's side, in terms of he could then financially, build himself up in terms of work and other things. And also at the same time, it's also good, I reckon, for sisters as well, for alimats as well, and also for ghair alimats, because what sometimes happens is when you're living with like in-laws, some of the household work, again, it all depends on certain families, by the way, but some of the household work is kind of like reduced, or the burden isn't just taken by yourself. In other words, your mother may help out, other people in the family may help out. So for a new bride, it's actually quite good for her to kind of settle in, because you could imagine that if she's moving to a new house along with her husband, so it's the whole issue of new house, new furnitures, new everything, and you're kind of like starting everything from scratch. Whereas if you're already in a household routine where there's family there, the mother-in-law is kind of like doing more or less all the household work, and you're just helping out, there's a routine there. So it's kind of good, just like makes you settle down and so on. And then after you kind of settle down, then perhaps if you have children or more children and there's no space in the house, then fair enough, you decide to move later, then that's okay. But what I would recommend, but again, this is just my recommendation, more in particular for, I'll say, couples who are from the UK or from an alim or an alima background, I'll say that is kind of considered to be much better. But again, there may be different situations and so on. And as we just touched on the topic of in-laws, just one thing to mention about in-laws and so on. This is mainly for the elders in the audience. Remember, our daughter-in-law, they're not our khadimats, by the way. They're not our slave girls. Very, very important that we kind of understand this particular point. They're not our slave girls. We should kind of like respect them. Actually, we should kind of respect them more than we respect our own daughters. Yeah, own daughters. And the reason why is because our daughters will kind of like leave. They're going to get married soon, and they'll leave the family. But our daughter-in-laws, they're going to be with us for more or less until we die or until something happens. So we should kind of respect our daughter-in-law. We should understand that our daughter-in-law are in particular, they got together and they approached Sayyida Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha. And they said to Sayyida Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha that, can you go to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and complain to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam on our behalf that you are spending too much time with Hazrat Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, that you kind of let Hazrat Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha off in many, many things, whereas we, the other wives, we don't get let off. So they raised the complaint to you, to Sayyida Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha, to go and tell Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Sayyida Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha, she went and she complained to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam didn't say anything. Thereafterwards, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said these words. It's a long hadith, I'm just mentioning the main part of the hadith. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said these words to Hazrat Fatima: "Ay bunayya, O daughter, ay bunayya, alasti tuhibbin man uhibbu." Do you not love the one who I love? Do you not love the one who I love? فَقَالَتْ بَلَى. So Fatima radiallahu anha has said, of course, I love the one who you love. Then Prophet ﷺ then said, فَأَحِبِّي هَذِهِ. So therefore love her. I love Aisha radiallahu anha. The point which I'm trying to make from this particular hadith is that, look everyone, Prophet ﷺ is saying to Sayyidah Fatima radiallahu anha, love Aisha. Why? Because I love her. So Prophet ﷺ is saying to Hazrat Fatima that love your stepmother, i.e. Aisha, because I love her. So if we now flip the coin around, we can derive that our wives should love our mothers, i.e. the mother-in-law. Why? Because the husband loves the mother. But also at the same time, the mother-in-laws should love their daughter-in-law. Why? Because she is the beloved of the husband, i.e. their son. So what this particular hadith is telling us is to love those people. So in other words, the hadith is telling us that Sayyidah Fatima should love Hazrat Aisha. Why? She is the beloved of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So likewise, the wife should love their mother-in-laws because they are going to be the beloved of their husbands. But also at the same time, the mother-in-laws should love their daughter-in-laws because she is going to be the beloved of her husband, i.e. her son. So from this we can understand that it's very, very important that love, that dignity is there between mother-in-laws and these things. Again, I don't want to delve into this topic too much because I know it's an issue which we can be here for a long time discussing about. To always be there, inshallah ta'ala. Okay, now if we move on to the next page very quickly, page 10, Salatul Istikhara. Now, alhamdulillah, always remember the principle when it comes to like asbab and tawakkul. As mentioned in the hadith, aqil thumma tawakkal, which means tie the camel and then place trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Lock the door and then place trust in Allah. Don't leave the front door open and inviting the thieves to come and burgle your house. Lock it and then place trust in Allah. When it comes to, like, say, for example, studying, don't just say, tomorrow Allah will make me pass the exams. No, just study first and then place trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So likewise, alhamdulillah, what we mentioned in terms of how to choose a spouse, you think, okay, you know what, this may be the right person, but then on top of that, it is very, very important that you make lots and lots of du'as before, and also it's very, very important to pray Salatul Istikhara. Now, Salatul Istikhara is a 2 rakat salah, and after you perform the 2 rakat salah, you make the following dua. Salatul Istikhara is like a nafil prayer. Okay, so it's like a nafil prayer. And the rule with regards to nafil prayers is that, well, in the Hanafi fiqh that is anyway, it can't be prayed during the makruh time. which is after Fajr Fard and after Asr Fard. So besides, and obviously the three impermissible times, which is rising of the sun, when the sun is at its zenith, and number 3 is at setting of the sun. So besides the 3 impermissible times and the 2 times where it's considered to be makruh to pray nafal, that is after Asr and after Fajr, besides those 5 times, Bushra min Allah, glad tidings from Allah. Then the second type of dream is called takhweef min ash-shaytan, like shaitan trying to scare you, like frightening dream, scary dream, nightmares. And then the third type of dream is called hadithun nafs. And hadithun nafs is whatever you're thinking about throughout the day, you then see that in the form of a dream. If you ask students who got their exams, whether at university or in madrasa, because they're kind of like studying every single day, so when they go to sleep, they have dreams of their notes, and they think that they're getting some kind of ilham, that this is their question paper for the exam, but these are just like their notes flying around in their memory. So the point I'm trying to make is this is what we call hadithun nafs. So likewise, if you're really intending to get married to someone, obviously, you're going to see her picture and her image in your mind, aren't you? That doesn't necessarily mean that that's from Salatul Istikhara. It just means it's a Hadithul Nafs example. So it's not necessary that you have to see a dream. You can, but it's not something which is necessary. What is then Salatul Istikhara? Then why do we then perform it? So the key thing about Salatul Istikhara is that it's that contentment and feeling you get in the heart that she is the right person or this is the correct decision. So it's that contentment you get in that heart. It's that, okay, feeling that, okay, you know what, this is the correct one. This is the right decision. So this is what is known as Salatul Istikhara. So it's very important that we kind of do perform it the very, very least. Even though you may have made your mind up that, okay, I'm going to go ahead with this one. Even then, just pray Salatul Hajjah at least then, which is like a 2 rakat salah, asking Allah to fulfill and it's important also that you constantly pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make things easy for you. Now, if we move on to the next part, marriage with one's immediate family or clan. So again, I kind of mentioned this already. Again, to marry someone from within your own caste or within your own ethnicity. Just say Bengali marrying a Bengali or Pakistani marrying a Pakistani. So again, what is your intention behind that? If your intention is that it is based on tribalism, that you're marrying this particular person because they happen to be Bengalis like you, they happen to be Pakistanis like you, and you feel that the Bengali or the Pakistani tribe or clan is more superior than other clans or tribes, if it's done with that intention, then obviously that is wrong, that is incorrect. Marriage will be done, but your intention is obviously incorrect and wrong. But obviously if you're marrying someone from the same culture, just purely based on kuf, based on compatibility, yeah, that you're marrying the sister who happens to be the same ethnic group as yours, not because of, like you feel that you're better than everybody else, you feel that you're superior than everybody else, no, just purely based on the fact that of compatibility, and that they can relate to you and your family and vice versa, then in that situation there is nothing wrong with that. Okay, but as I already mentioned before, even if somebody was to marry, say, a Pakistani boy or Pakistani girl or from different ethnicities, it doesn't affect the marriage whatsoever. If we move on to the next part regarding persons with whom marriage is unlawful and haram. So again, this is all mentioned from the Quranic verse, so there's no need for me to delve into every single one of them. I think more or less everybody knows those women who are unlawful and haram to marry, so mothers, daughters, sisters, straightforward, daughters of your brothers, daughters of your sisters, your mothers who breastfed you, your sisters through breastfeeding, mothers of your wives. So always remember that your mother-in-law, she is considered to be unlawful and haram forever, yeah? So as soon as you basically marry a woman, your mother-in-law automatically becomes haram. Yep, so as soon as you just get married, there's no condition of intimacy. So what I mean by that is that as soon as you get married, your mother-in-law automatically becomes unlawful and haram. Even if you divorce your wife, she will always be haram and unlawful for you. And your stepdaughters under your care who are born of your women with whom you have had intercourse. Now with regards to stepdaughters, and this becomes a masla to clarify, according to Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, I think other schools of thought may slightly differ. And Fatima has a daughter, Zainab, from a previous marriage. As soon as Abdullah married Fatima, and he then consummated the marriage, then what would happen is that Zainab, his stepdaughter, will then become unlawful and haram as soon as he consummated the marriage. But if, say, for example, if he did not consummate the marriage, then what would happen is that Zainab would not be unlawful upon him. So imagine just he got married to Fatima and he didn't consummate the marriage, there wasn't any seclusion, there wasn't a khalwa, and then what happened was that he then divorced Fatima. So if later on, if he wants to marry Zainab, his stepdaughter, then that would be considered to be correct, that would be considered to be permissible. So these are the rules with regards to, if we look at the next page, there's some rules there. I think it's very important that we kind of go over these. Page 13 now, marriage with one's son-in-law is not permissible. Okay, so this is irrespective of whether the daughter is already living with him or not. In all cases, nikah with him is considered to be haram. Now, the point to mention is that marriage with son-in-law is not permissible. As I said, whether the daughter is living with him or not, nikah with him is not allowed. Next point, as long as a sister is married to a husband, it is not permissible for another sister to marry this brother-in-law of hers. However, if the sister passes away or he divorces her and she completes her iddah, it will be permissible for the other sister to marry her brother-in-law. So again, these are, you'll be surprised like some of the things which are happening out there. Again, these rules, a lot of people, in particular in Jahal, don't know what exactly they're doing. So classic, this is very common as well. Sometimes marrying the wife's sister. Now, what I mean by it's common, meaning like not common in terms of they'll actually marry whilst he's married to this sister here, but sometimes due to khalwa and these things, sometimes relationship starts with the wife's sister. There have been cases like that. Where sometimes, because obviously lack of parda and these things intermingling, closeness, then relationship starts with brother-in-laws and these. That's why it's mentioned in the hadith. أَرَأَيْتَ الْحَمْوَ قَالَ الْحَمْوُ الْمَوْتِ أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. But anyway, the point which I want to make here is that if, say, for example, a man is married to, obviously, his wife, and then his wife has a sister. So whilst he is married, he can't marry or he can't have as a second wife his wife's sister. And tajma'u bayn al-ukhtayn. Yes, if the wife of his, if he divorces her, or she passes away, or he divorces her, and then after observing the iddat, then they get married, then that would be correct and that would be allowed. Another rule to mention here is adopting a child. So when you adopt a child, that child does not become your real children. They're not your real son and they're not your real daughter. Do you keep that in mind? So when you adopt a son, or a boy or a girl, they don't become automatically your real son. They don't become automatically your real daughter. So because of that reason, you are allowed to marry them afterwards. You are allowed to marry your adopted daughter afterwards because they're not really your daughter. Likewise, if you want to marry your son to the adopted daughter, that would be permissible and that would be allowed as well. So do keep that in mind, inshallah. Obviously, there's two ways. One is like through fosterage, through breastfeeding, then that's another issue. So just say you received a young boy or girl and within 2.5 years, according to Imam Abu Hanifa, you breastfeed that child. So then that's different. Then that child will then become your real son or daughter. Okay, so I'm sure, especially nowadays with, well, I'm not sure here in Australia, but I'm sure it's probably very similar. We have adoption kind of crisis in the UK. A lot of like parents, due to one reason or the other, mental health issues, depression, anxiety, sometimes fairly, sometimes unfairly as well by the council and by the government, they get their children taken off them. They get their children taken off them. And then they opt for adoption. Now, what happens is that sometimes they are given to Muslim families. Most of the time, they're given to non-Muslim families. So when they're given to Muslim families, remember, you just adopted them, so they're just going to be like strangers now when they mature. So you have to do parda and these things from them. But obviously, if they're still within 2.5 years, and if the mother was to breastfeed that child, then that child now will become like your foster child. So in that case, that child will be treated like your own flesh and blood, will be treated like your own son and your own daughter. So in that situation, there's no rules then with regards to hijab, and there's no rules in terms of obviously in that situation, they will be haram. So obviously, your real son or daughter would not be able to marry any one of them. So do keep that particular point in mind, inshallah. Any questions or how long left? How long until Asr time? Or? Any questions or? One of the questions here is that the generation nowadays looking at it from an Islamic perspective, so again, it does change, but there's not a particular age which we can pinpoint. It all depends on the urf and according to the situation. So even nowadays as well, many families, at the age of 16 or 18, they're not going to really get their sons or daughters married because they know that they're not of that mature or understanding age. They may be mature physically, in terms of their baligh or their baligha, but they're not mature in terms of looking after a family and looking after taking responsibility. They're not of that level. So then in that situation, if you want to say, for example, well, I'm not going to say a particular age, but when you feel in your son or your daughter that, okay, what, they're in their 20s now, they're mature enough to look after a family, they're mature enough to take responsibilities, then in that situation, yes, the age can be delayed and so on. But there's not particular time or something when they need to get married. Next question is, what is iddah and what is considered as an appropriate period of time when a brother or sister can remarry? So iddah is waiting period. So when if a wife or if a woman has been divorced, her waiting period is 3 menstruation cycles if she's menstruating, and if she's non-menstruating, then it is 3 months. And if a woman has lost her husband, then it's 4 months and 10 days. 4 months and 10 days. So we call that the waiting period. The next question is that what is considered as an appropriate period of time when a brother or sister can remarry? For a brother, there isn't a particular time limit, shar'an. If he divorced his wife today, he could literally by tonight, he could get married again. There's no haraj in terms of that. With regards to women, I've given the waiting period. So again, Islamically, she can get married as soon as her waiting period finishes. So many hadiths, as soon as the sahabiyats would finish their iddah, they would kind of beautify themselves and they would get ready to get married. So there's many examples like that. I think there's a hadith in Ibn Majah of Ukhte Farwiya. As soon as her husband's iddah finished, she got ready to get married, and somebody passed by and said, "What are you doing?" She said, "Oh, I'm getting ready to get married," and so on. Anyway, there's a hadith which is mentioned in Ibn Majah, but there's no particular waiting period and so on. But I will add on this as well. When we look through the tafsir of the Holy Quran, we find that initially the waiting period for a woman was for 1 year. غير إخراج متاعا إلى الحول غير إخراج. And thereafterwards it got abrogated to 4 months and 10 days. Remember, that is when a woman loses her husband. So initially it was for a year, then it became abrogated, and then it became 4 months and 10 days. And the scholars have mentioned that 1 year is kind of considered to be a good amount or a good time to kind of recuperate from the loss of a spouse, whether through divorce, whether through death. that's enough to kind of like settle over, to get ready, to kind of like put that period of your life away, and then think about remarriage and these things. So in terms of, look, at the end of the day, there's no force from the Sharia, you have to remarry again. But if you want to look at an acceptable time limit, from my understanding, from looking at the text and so on, you could say 1 year, as mentioned in the ayat and so on, would be acceptable, even though the ayat's been abrogated. But Ibn Abbas, however, still acts upon that particular ayat, because according to Ibn Abbas, he says that he tries to reconciliate between all the verses of the Quran and not make any ayats abrogated. So 1 year would be considered sufficient, but there isn't any particular set time and so on. And we'll just take one more question before we move on. I think that's a long question. I'll take a short one. Okay. Okay, somebody's asking that if I am divorced with a child and wish to remarry, do I have to choose a spouse that has the same situation as me, or can I marry someone without a child? So the answer is that you can marry if you want to marry someone who's single or someone who's previously divorced. Alhamdulillah, that's totally fine. That's totally permissible. It's not necessarily that you have to marry someone who's actually previously been divorced or in the same situation as yours. You can marry someone who's single, someone who doesn't have children. It's entirely up to you. Obviously, again, going back to the compatibility issue, I think one of the reasons why perhaps sisters may, or even men as well, who have children from previous marriage, may want to marry someone who's in the same situation as them, is so that they could understand the situation a bit better. So if they have children, you have children from previous marriage, and you know what? You kind of like look after each other's children in a way. Sometimes it does happen that you may have children from a previous marriage, then you kind of like get married to somebody else, and they may not show that same, love, like their natural mother or their natural father may basically give them. So that could lead to issue. That's why one of the rules regarding hidana, i.e. custody of children in the Hanafi fiqh, is that up to the age of 9 for a girl and age of 7 for a boy, the boy or the girl is in the mother's care, mother's custody. However, if the mother was to marry someone, then what happens? She loses the custody of the child. And why that happens, again, you just have to look at UK in particular. I'm sure there are probably stories like this in Australia as well. But if you look at the UK, you'll find a lot of cases where stepfathers have killed their stepchildren. Yeah, they've abused their stepchildren. So the point I'm trying to make here is that perhaps sometimes when you marry someone who doesn't show that same love to your own children, then it may be problematic. So that's why, I'll say widows or divorcees may look at someone who's got responsibilities and children like them, so they can understand the situation better. But technically, from a Sharia perspective, then you can marry whoever you want, inshallah. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I was thinking, yeah. Sure.
Shall I have maybe 5 minutes maximum? Stretch your legs a bit and come back, inshallah.